Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Faye Zaski, Group Manager for Toyota Research and Development, Materials Engineering Department.
Good morning, and welcome to the panel discussion, Women Leading Disruptive Innovation. My name is Faye Zaski, Group Manager of Toyota Motor R&D, Ann Arbor, Michigan. As a sponsor of this morning's breakfast, we hope that you got plenty to eat and are ready to hear an enlightening conversation from 6 dynamic women at the forefront of their companies that are disrupting their respective industries. Before we begin, each seat has a promotional flyer discussing SAE's latest book, The Road to the Top is Not on the Map. We are giving away 10 copies of the book. If you have a business card from Dan Hooven attached to the flyer, simply email him your contact information, and he'd be happy to send you the book upon release. Kristen Tabar of Toyota is a contributing author, so I hope you find this book to be an insightful look into female leaders who candidly share their habits, motivations, triumphs, defeats, and lessons learned that help them achieve top jobs in the industry. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce Miss Denise Gray, President of LG Chem Michigan. A complete bio of Miss Gray is available on our website, and we are really thrilled that she could make her time in her busy schedule for this very important discussion today. Ladies and gentlemen, Miss Denise Gray.
Good morning to everyone. I've got to wake myself up, so I need you to wake yourselves up as well. It can only be SAE to get us up early in the morning to come out here and have an amazing conversation. And there are amazing people on this panel today. So sit back, do not go to sleep, you won't. You are really in, it's going to be a really good treat for you. So thanks so much for the introduction. What I want to do to start off is to have each of the panelists to introduce themselves a bit. They won't tell you all the secrets because we want you to stay awake for the rest of the discussion, but they do want to give you some insights into who they are, where they work, what they've done. So with that, Allison.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm Allison Malik, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer of May Mobility. May Mobility is a Michigan-based startup focused on providing self-driving transportation services with a focus on first-mile, last-mile transportation. I've been doing that for the past 2 years. Before that, I actually worked at GM for almost 10 years, both as an engineer in electrification, and then I moved into corporate venture, helping GM work with startups. So I've been able to see a lot of different facets of the industry as it's evolved, both in the electrification space as well as the automation space.
Hi, everyone. My name is Greta Kutelenko, and I'm the CEO and founder of Acerta. At Acerta, we provide an AI-based platform that uses data from vehicles and their systems in order to detect and predict failures. We're applying it to a lot of vehicle systems during manufacturing to detect defects, predict potential warranty cases, as well as to on-road vehicles for predictive failure detection. We've been running Acerta for the last 2.5, 3 years, and prior to that, my background is from Magna and functional safety of ADAS systems.
Hi everyone, I'm Stacy Miller, and I'm a senior manager at Toyota Motor North America in the Digital Transformation and Mobility Group. I've been in the industry for over 25 years. With the last 2 years, I've been focused on mobility, and what we're focused at Toyota right now is the transformation of Toyota from an automobile company to a mobility company.
And my name is MJ. I'm from Ford Motor Company. I run a startup within Ford called GoRide Health. It recently actually got spun out into its own LLC. I've been with Ford for about 7.5 years, and I come from the marketing side of the industry.
Excellent. Didn't I tell you some amazing entrepreneurs on this stage? Just want to make sure there are questions that you all can send in to us. They gave me an iPad, and as long as I don't break it, I can get your questions. We can fill your questions from the floor. But I have a few questions of my own to kind of get things started. The first one is e-mobility, the whole ecosystem around it. I think it has allowed for more innovation, more creativity. Can you tell me what it means to you to be in this new field?
So for the work that I'm able to do now and in mobility in general, it's very exciting to me because it, in my mind, has really changed the discussion around vehicles as the symbol and horsepower and things like that, and thinking really back to the people. So many people are passionate about how cars drive, and that's great, but for the rest of us that just need mobility to get from point A to point B, there are different factors that we think about. Ease of use, not having to deal with parking, not having to worry about maintenance, things like that. It's been really exciting to me to watch the industry shift its thinking to the consumer experience and really think about how do we enable transportation and not just how do we make sure that we've got a vehicle that can handle, you know, a really curvy road nicely, which is fun, but not the driving people do every day.
So what makes it something that you, the four of you, personally think based on your capability, your interests, your creativity, what makes you special in this new ecosystem, creative space?
I'll take this one. You know, I think for women such as us, you know, the traditional means of career in this field can be redefined. I think we bring to the table capabilities not only from our past experience in this industry, but this entrepreneurial spirit that can really boost mobility. I'm really excited of the fact that we are a part of the auto industry and we can provide mobility for people from a transportation perspective, but we can also start to bring insights into how do we get mobility from a personal perspective, as you mentioned, not only across the town, but across the room. So this is a really exciting space for us. And as women, because we can bring in other experiences to the table, not that maybe is not textbook for the auto industry, it's really allowing us to make some progress.
I think for me personally, looking at certain areas where I found there were gaps and a lot of opportunities in the future, one aspect I think of mobility, like autonomous vehicles and all of these new innovation coming to the vehicles, that in my head opened up a lot of opportunity for quality and assessment of safety of vehicles on the road. And I think one thing that I find really great for kind of myself and I think many other people in this area is finding those gaps and opportunities for the future and finding ways that you can make a difference. And I think that really kind of set a part in how I can contribute to these growing trends, or anybody really, in mobility.
So I mean, the auto industry traditionally has 100 years of definitions around what it means to be in leadership, right? There's a natural hierarchy because of so much history. You start with things like, you know, powertrain. I mean, it's very much front and center. And you think about what the auto industry is going through, which is, it is at an inflection point where it's trying to change from a dominant traditional industry into something that's very different and very new that requires definition. And that is something that's very hard and requires a lot of challenges. And I think with women, one of the things that, you know, today we still are a minority in leadership in the automotive industry. And that passion, that ability to challenge that traditional hierarchical structure, both from a leadership perspective, from an expertise perspective, and from the ability to communicate and empathize differently with the needs that are going on in the mobility space today, I think that's what we bring to the table.
Excellent. Can I write all of this down? Because this is very enriching. I'd like to ask the question, for you in your career, what was the shift? And when did that shift happen? Or what was the pivotal time where you said, you know, I think instead of just being a contributor, I think I deserve to be in a leadership role. Can you remember what that time was, or what the thing was, or what dream did you have that when you woke up you said, I could do that. In fact, I want to do that. Can you remember that?
Yeah, so for me, it was interesting. So I was doing research at the University of Waterloo, and I was working with with a professor and another colleague, and we had this crazy idea. Okay, let's take some of our tech, let's make a company out of it. And both my co-founders are extremely technical, and I'm very technical myself. And we're thinking, okay, well, how do we do this? And started, trying to figure out how to run a business. And I think where the pivotal point for me came when I realized that, out of the three of us, I'm maybe the least technical one, or maybe the one that could make more of a difference in running a business and making this actually a reality as a business rather than just, a cool research project. So I think for me, one day I was really just woke up and said, okay, you know what? I can take leadership in this area and let me do this and make it happen. And so at that point, I'm like, okay, I was going to stop doing my research, stop doing anything, and figure out a way, okay, how do I run a business and change, my career completely at that point and figure out, how to do this. So I think it was a very transitional period.
Yes.
I think early on in my career, it was when I started taking those roles that were outside of my normal day-to-day job, right? When you start to put yourself out there and volunteer to take on maybe what someone else didn't want to really do. And from there, I realized that there was a passion that I had inside to do those things. And fortunate for me, especially at Toyota, I've been able to grasp onto those opportunities. There's a lot of opportunities for women out there if they're willing to ask for it.
So I'll give you a story, because I thought about this for a long time, and I wouldn't say that it is a defining moment, but rather it's almost like an accretion over time, right? And so I go back to when I was in business school and I had served my entire cohort as an academic sort of director the whole time. And when it was time to run for student council, I was like, oh no, I'm not, I help people manage their calendars, like, this is not what, no one's gonna vote for me, so I didn't even run. And then my friend said, I really think you should run, and in fact, I want you to run with me, and I have people asking me to run with me, and I want you to run with me. And I said, listen, Peter, no one even knows who I am. I don't go to the social stuff. I'm really bad with networking, but if you want to put me out there, you go ahead and do that, right? So finally, he did that, and I just asked my business school friends at the time, I said, look, I'm doing this thing, if you want to help, great. And then the president of the student council came up to me and said, I was having lunch, and he's like, I don't know who you are, but people have been walking up to me and saying that if I don't put you in this executive director position, they're gonna have a fight with me. And at that moment, it really made me realize that the thing about leadership, and there's so many ways to define it, but the way I define it for myself is if you can get other people to fight for you and to actually want you to lead them, right? You can't be a leader if you don't have people willing to do that. So fast forward into when I was pitching to start this business within Ford, standing in front of the entire senior leadership, and I really had the backing of some of the most senior leaders in the company, and they were the ones that were fighting to put me out there. And that was when I realized that the ability to get others to fight for your ideas, for your passion, but also for you as an individual, is what allows me to be a leader.
Excellent.
I think building on that, in my early days as an engineer, I took on a lot of projects that were ill-defined and dove right in and had a blast and actually brought a project to a point that it no longer was going to be sort of an advanced research project, but become a technology that we wanted to put into production. And I was told that I probably wouldn't be allowed to keep running that project because I think I had a year of tenure in the automotive industry, so it was like not heard of. But I actually was able to continue to lead it, and it was because I just kept figuring out what I needed to do next. I never knew, what they were asking for in the meetings, so I'd, go back and ask my contacts, like, what is this document? What do I need to get for that? And just kept doing what I knew how to do best. And there was no one better suited to take it on, but I had the opportunity to demonstrate that, for which I am very thankful. And then coming from that, I think that helped me to realize, like, if you can get people to buy into your vision, you can do great things. And so I kept wanting to do that through my career and saw an opportunity specifically in autonomy. Back in 2017, everyone was going to have fleets of thousands of autonomous vehicles out on the road now. And I had been an engineer, and I had also been working in corporate venture and understood how hard it is to stand up a consumer-based network, and kind of scratched my head and said, that doesn't make any sense. And was really excited when I met my co-founders, but had a similar experience where it's like, these are really great technical leaders. They need business support. Like, let me come in and help to amplify that. And it's a really exciting ride, but you also have to just dive in and believe in yourself, even when most of your brain is saying, like, are you sure? It's a good idea.
It's amazing. I heard having faith in myself, others having faith in me, finding an area where there's a need. There's a tendency for us to, we can find those voids. Others may say everything's looking really good, things are on track, but we look at it sometimes and go, something's not quite right. And sometimes you may find that you're by yourself saying that as well. But I think that's what leadership is all about. Defining the things that need to occur, finding the areas that can, where the voids are. I'm reminded of a story when I was in engineering as well, and I just wanted to be just the best contributor I could possibly be. And we had an amazing team, but we needed a leader. Our leader was moving on. And I don't think I stepped forward. I think everybody else stepped back and said, you are it. And I said, are you sure? Because this was my own team. And sometimes it's harder to become the leader of your team that you've been a part of for the last 7, 8, 9 years. But for me, that was the best validation I had, because my team member says, Denise, there's nobody else that can lead us but you. And I said, well, I'm gonna do it then. And it all came to play. And then I look back and I go, wait a minute, that's happened over and over and over again. And so there is a pattern that probably starts out way before we can even recognize it, but yet the people we are allows us to do what has to be done. And if that means leading, then that means leading. If it means organizing, that means organizing. If it means learning new things and new ways and new people, then so be it. So the courage, that's kind of the part that I heard from each one of you. The next question I have, and I haven't seen any coming, oh, here's one. How do you motivate yourself when it seems a solution to a tough problem is nowhere in sight? I think that's a good one. I think we see that one quite a bit. Anyone want to try that one out?
I think for me, it's making sure that kind of the larger project that I'm working on is something that I'm really passionate about. So when I started at GM, I was working for one of the largest automakers in the world on electric vehicles. Like if we wanted electric vehicles to be successful, this was sort of Tesla's early days, I wanted to do it there. It seemed like the best place to have an opportunity to really impact a lot of the environment, which is something that I'm very passionate about. And same thing with May Mobility. Man, all of the things that can't be done. You can't get cars out on the road. You can't get insurance. You can't get city approval. We've done it all. It hasn't been easy, but being able to keep that kind of North Star of if we do this right, we can change the fundamental premise of transportation. And transportation impacts every part of everyone's daily lives. That's huge. That's a reason to get up in the morning every day, even if everything feels like it's going wrong. And those days do, happen not too frequently, but do happen. But having that, being really bought into the outcome that you're working towards, for me, has really helped on the tough days.
And I have to echo that as well. I mean, you've got to keep, North Star is interesting, we use that same term. You got to really keep focused on what's ahead of you. We're going to have ups and downs in this. This is change for everyone, right? And our leader, whether it's leaders in their organizations or outside, they're uncomfortable with the change right now. And so it's how do we influence? And as leaders, the confidence in ourselves and knowing that it's the right thing, the end goal is what we're shooting for, we need to target on how do we influence the move? How do we use our strengths And I love everything that the panel has said today, because we take what we know from a business perspective. We know we have that strength there, and the partnerships it's a huge dynamic to move the ball forward. You just have to think about what tremendous change that you're going to be a part of.
So first, I allow myself emotionally to accept that this is a really hard problem. And I think you have to acknowledge that, because if you just come at it intellectually, you're going to get dragged down, right? So the first thing I say to myself is, you know what? This is really hard. It's hard for everybody involved. It's hard for my team. And I just kind of allow myself to feel that. The second thing I do is go back to the last time. And most of you, I think, whoever asked this question, you probably had similar experiences before. I go back to the last time and say, okay, what happened last time? How do we process through this? And I will tell you, in the beginning of the startup that I'm running was 5 people in a conference room. And on Monday, we would write down all the problems we had to solve this week. And it would look like, just like you said, like insurance it looked completely impossible. And guess what? By Friday, every week, all of those problems were always solved. And so having a great team helps. But I remember that process, and now when I have a tough problem, I go back and I look at that and I say to myself, we've done it before, so let's try to do that again. The third thing I would recommend is, especially when you're thinking about, and this had to do with the North Star, but maybe a little different analogy, is I think about trying to separate that problem into what I call the ocean and the ship, right? So the ocean is all the things around you that you can't control. Those are your environment, politics, things just completely outside of your control. And you are steering this ship. Whether you're a captain, you're a CEO, it doesn't matter, but you're basically steering that ship. And do not confuse the structure of the ship with the uncertainty of the ocean, right? So if you're steering the ship, it's gonna feel wobbly, it's gonna feel really difficult, but that is the nature of the ocean, that is not the nature of the ship. And what you have to do is continue to build the structure of the ship and make sure that it's sound, and do it slowly over time so that it becomes stable enough and large enough to withstand the uncertainty of the ocean. But the ocean will always be there. And every tough problem, there's usually one part that's the ocean and one part that's the ship. And as leaders, you have to focus on the ship, knowing that even when you feel like you're wobbling everywhere, that is due to the nature of the ocean. And as long as you keep building the ship, you will be fine.
Excellent, excellent. The next question comes around motivating young women to go into technology areas or go into leadership areas. What are some of the things that you do, some of the tricks of the trade, some of the ways that we think all of us can motivate young women to go into the technology or entrepreneurship kind of areas?
Well, I know at Toyota, if I even think about young women, even at the earliest age, we have a lot of programs where we are working with young people to make sure that introduce them to the opportunities that they might have, right? Educate them, whether it's STEM education, whether it's introducing them to leaders within our organization, so that they can see for themselves role models in this industry, number one. Number two, we're very deliberate with our female team members to show them that there's growth and opportunity, and for them to take advantage of what motivates them, right? And not to be afraid to venture into different areas and explore different things. We I think as women leaders need to be very deliberate in supporting and rising up those that are coming through the ranks as well, and really open doors for them, and be there as sounding boards, as sponsors, and really empower them to feel like that they can progress through.
I think one aspect for me to just add has been to make it to show how fun it could be. Yeah. Especially with technology, a lot of the times it could be daunting, just the amount of things to learn out there and the amount of tech there is, and there's always change year over year. But what I've seen work really well, like with, and I have young siblings who are girls myself, so what we do often is just do like little hackathon-like events where we just build small, simple robots. And I think there's so many games out there, so many kits nowadays that make it so accessible. And I think it's just making sure that the young women know it's okay, and that it's okay to have an interest in that, and that it can be a lot of fun to pursue. And I think it's really important to start communicating that from very early
Yeah.
age.
We did a program at Toyota very specifically for the team members' children to introduce them to our organization and introduce them to what we do. And just recently, we had an event as early as 3rd grade to 5th grade. It's very important for us to engage with girls at that age. That's when they're making their decisions about what they can be and what they're capable of doing. So we were very specific. We wanted to make sure that we had some women leadership from our technical side that was able to engage with those folks, because nowadays you need to get to them very, very early, so that when their generation gets here, it won't even be a question that they will be leaders in this industry.
I think it's also exciting to see early on, like when deciding to go to engineering school, I knew I needed to pay off student loans, and I was good at math. So that was my calculus to decide to go into the field. And as I've gone back and talked to high school students and middle school students and even elementary school students, when you have this idea of like, what do you want to be when you grow up, there's the rote ideas of a teacher or a policeman. Like engineering, especially in the technical fields, is so broad and so vague.
Yeah.
I've really switched it to, where do you want to have impact? And when you put people in the mindset of where do you want to have impact, or like what types of things are fun for you, engineering's everywhere. And it was really fun for me to like talk to high school students who are like, well, I really like music, or I'm going to be an athlete. And you're like, okay, well, the likelihood of you being, the next superstar athlete or next superstar musician are fairly low. However, there's a ton of work to do in audio engineering, and there's a ton of work to do in a lot of the biomedical field that's working on like kinesthetics and like how people repair after surgeries and things like that, and helping to change the discussion around impact instead of like, what do you want to be? What kind of impact do you want to have? And I think, in my opinion, that tends to align well with how women think. Even from a young age, it's not necessarily that I want to be the CEO. It's I want to have impact, and the best way to do that is X, Y, Z, and helping people open up their mind about how to do that, and that it's okay to like have technical hobbies and to have that interest, especially from a young age, is really, really important.
I like what you said, because I am not, I sit amongst all of you, I am not an engineer. I did not come up through that background, right? I came up from a business perspective, but here I am sitting here with these gals, which I think I'm just so honored to do. I would not be in this space if I hadn't thought about, to your point, what interests me, what's my passion. So I get to be in mobility now, and I get to help launch technology, maybe more with a business spin, but I didn't necessarily. We've got to teach our young women that the road that they go on is so open if they just apply themselves and they go for their passion and what they're interested in. Yeah.
And I agree with Stacy. I'm not a technical, I'm like the least technical probably of all of you. So there's a couple things I do, right? And so the first is, I do think young women, and I've seen today's, and I coach and mentor some of the younger women on my team, they're coming with so much intelligence and passion, and it's amazing to just watch these women already are leaders in their own right. But what sometimes impedes them is a lot of the feedback that they've gotten in the past. And so what I work with these women on is I help them, we try to work on, tell me all the criticisms you've received in the past. Let's write these things down, and let's talk about them in a trustworthy, safe space to understand how some of these feedback are actually connected to strengths, right? Because as women, we tend to get feedback, and I've gotten it myself. I've been told I was both too aggressive and not talkative enough at the same time. So how do you take that kind of feedback? And a lot of women have. And so I want to sit down with these people and say, let's talk about the things that have been said to you that maybe are standing in the way of you developing your passion, and let's diagnose them one by one. So you're working with people on their insecurities and on their feedback with them. And the other thing I try to do is you got to work with the men as well, right? Because a lot of them are still mentors and they're great leaders, and they're great at being able to coach the younger women in the company as well. And so being able to, in my peer group, work with the male leaders on the team so that they can understand how to work with the younger female leaders is going to help develop those female leaders as well. And even really small things, and these are things I try to do on my team, such as making sure that women are not the only ones after like a potluck that's cleaning up the room, right? They're not the only ones organizing these things, because these are traditional gender stereotypes that very in corporate setting, people tend to feel very comfortable just settling into. And I really try to make sure that my entire team embraces the values in challenging that.
Even in the startup setting, we actually set a rule where if you are the meeting caller, you are either taking your notes or you are identifying someone to take notes. So we don't have the default of the woman who happens to have the nicest handwriting in the room takes all of the notes. And it's these little things that women leaders have the opportunity to actually change the paradigm on, to talk to our peers and to point out, like, don't use that language because here is like the waterfall of what you are creating, which is not what you want. And making sure that it's an exciting spot as leaders to be able to shift that and to bring consciousness around it.
I asked a question about how do we develop young women into technology and entrepreneurship. Excuse me. Well, my question was for all young people, obviously. I have 2 sons, so I'm not biased. But as a person who's always trying to hire the best resources, here in the United States, it's getting harder and harder and harder. And I think we have an obligation to help to bring all young people into these new exciting areas. And quite frankly, the next generation of technology, which is one of the questions I'm going to ask you, is yet to be defined. We talk about mobility today, and we recognize that we're just in the cusp of the new next generation, but the generation after that and after that. And I think it's going to require all of us to engage and rewrite how we speak to our young people about what they're going to do in their career, and not define it as disciplines or degrees or a particular company, but as you mentioned there. So I think what I just heard was an amazing way to restate, to re-engage in a discussion about careers that maybe we need to somehow connect up with our schools and how they create the material that they present to their children. Because we only see them for a little bit of time, but our educational system sees them all the time, and how it's depicted there on what they do is not what we need today and what's going to be there for us tomorrow. So I think there really has to be a connection here in a bigger way than just a few panels, a few couple of days, a week, a month, a year. It really has to happen in a larger way. If we here in the United States or on a global basis are really going to be able to take the people that are the young ones that we have today to be that next generation of thinkers, right? That's right. Maybe I'm getting old, and so I'm always looking for, where's the thinker in the room? Where are the people who are just not following the status quo? Because I need thinkers, right? Yeah. And what you guys described were how to make thinkers and have people really think about their careers. So the next question goes into, what's the next? What do you see? What still need to be solved when it comes to mobility or consumer focused, et cetera, et cetera?
I think building on that, there's a lot of great work being done around teaching kids to solve problems in school, as like engineering wise, as opposed to like, can you get the right answer on this math problem, which I think is really important, because as we move forward, the history of, so when I was a young engineer, not when I was in your department, I was told once that I needed to have 10 years of technical experience before I could be a leader in the organization. And I was like 5 years in. And I took that feedback quietly and was like, yeah, no, that's not going to happen. I'm now I'm at like my 12-year mark, so 2 years ago I would have been good enough to be a manager, which is crazy. At the same time, it's built on what worked. And what worked in the industry previously was getting that level of expertise, which I absolutely respect, but the industry is moving forward. Software is becoming much more critical in how we do our work. And thinking about the fact like software languages change way faster than new skills come out. And so as you think about how people become experts and how we take advantage of that, the nature of work itself within the automotive industry and within the industrial industry actually needs to change. And when we think about how we go in the future, like the HR problem of today, yes, we need to find good thinkers, but also just like how do we create new information flows so that way a 2-year, engineering veteran that is highly motivated can be as effective as possible with the best information as possible, as opposed to literally having to put in 10 years before they can be useful. A, that's not a good use of talent. B, that doesn't translate for how the rest of the vehicle is going to get built. All of the software needs to be able to move much quicker. And so as we think about the nature of work and how we establish organizations and what types of traits we really focus on, I personally think it's got to be a really big paradigm shift.
To add on, I think so the speed of change and how quickly cars and other things need to start coming out, and especially to match with the software speed, I think will bring a lot of innovation in the areas that we might not even think of. So some areas kind of like autonomous, we know it's coming, e-mobility, EV vehicles, we know it's coming, but these pushes kind of to much quicker cycles in the industry, I think a lot of innovation are going to come across the supply chain to make that happen. And I think a lot of where that's going to come from is from cross-functional people, people who have been in multiple areas of the organization, been in software, been in automotive. And I find even when we're building our organizations today, I'm constantly looking for people who understand, some multiple areas, who can really then think of completely different ways to approach the problem in ways that it hasn't been approached in the past. Because there's a level of curiosity, even for me, like I've never done manufacturing, but just so much curiosity in learning about it and seeing how can all of the software aspects I know apply to that. It will bring a lot of change that we potentially can't even expect right now.
And I, just to go back to your comment about early education, I have a student in high school, I have a son in high school, and I would say today, at least in his school, they are trying to teach the kids, whether it's project management or teamwork, the curriculum is changing to be more project-based, because I think our success is about the teams that we build, to your point, right? We're not all going to be experts in everything. We're going to have to bring the strengths of the team, manufacturing, for example, and business savvy and engineering. So that's going to be real important for the future. But I think from a consumer perspective, our consumers today, they're going to be looking for safety. I think safety is going to be number one, right? So whether it's physical safety from a vehicle perspective, or whether it's safety from a services perspective, we see it today in the news when we think about mobility. Mobility is so broad. I think security of data is going to be key, right? So cybersecurity, all of that with our connected vehicles, with all the services and all the information that our services are gathering, consumers are going to be ultra aware of that before they use the service. And then less is the customer experience, right? Which, when you're in a vehicle, what is my experience in my vehicle? What is my experience when I use a service, right? What I think is going to happen in the future, and I'm only basing this on the prior disruptive technologies that have come into play, we might see, well, number one, the clear winner is going to be those that can satisfy those three, right? For sure. What we may see in the future is a little bit more of a consortium or some consolidation, right? We're seeing partnerships today, right? With, just even some of the recent announcements, right? Because there's some strengths there that can be leveraged, because we know consumers are going to be looking for that. And like I said, I've seen it. We've seen it, even back in the 90s with search engines, for example. There were so many search engines when the internet came and all that, and then we started to see some mergers and consolidation of that. Now we have the big players today. And I have seen that in the financial services industry as well.
So I guess I have a little bit of a different way of thinking about the question you're asking, because for me, mobility is both a technological problem and it is also a social problem. And I think my question in terms of what's up next for mobility, and I don't have an answer, is how can we make mobility more inclusive, right? Because even as part of the automotive industry, we have new car sales, there's an industry SAR every year, and then like the used car market, and we don't really look at auction after that. But with mobility services, this is changing because the market, the entire pie starts to look very different. You have all over the globe, people are aging faster. In this country alone, we're going to go from 44 million to 88 million people that are going to be above the age of 65. People are living longer. There's also increasing inequality. And so how are we going to include the huge percent of market that's going to also take advantage of these technologies, of autonomous vehicles, of the great software, all of which, by the way, cost. There's a lot of cost attached to that. So how can we create businesses and business models that link together value from different industries, like you say, to be able to include and actually serve all people? I think when Henry Ford started Ford, he talked about opening the highways to mankind. What does that look like in the mobility space, right? How can we as automakers and as people in this industry now make sure that what we're designing and what we're doing is actually inclusive and not serving the top 20% of society?
Excellent, excellent. So before we go, I have to ask some questions a little bit more personal. Balance. I know that's still hard for me at age 50. And so I wonder, and I'm sure some others out here also wonder about that too. How do you balance life? How do you still become the person that they need you to be from a company perspective, but also be the person that you need to be for yourself and for your family members? Any tricks of the trade?
Okay, Allison.
Be okay with saying no. It's hard. It's really hard, especially when you're like, but what do I say no to? And that's where really understanding what drives you, what energizes you versus which things could you say yes to that would leave you completely drained, and making sure that you really focus on your own balance. It's like my third science project. It's just me and making sure I don't get too out of balance in any one direction in it, and it ends up being much more intentional than I think any one of us would like to think it needs to be. Like actually taking time and thinking about, what do I need? I'm feeling a little off. What do I need? Should I say no? Like yesterday, last week I agreed to go to a dinner with a colleague of mine. Had some salespeople in town, and it was going to be a great thing, but I was coming in off of a red eye, then had to be here for a panel, had to be out in Ann Arbor, and the dinner was in Southfield, and it wouldn't get done till 9. I was like, oh my God, I could end up driving home and like falling asleep in the car. That's not safe. And 2 years ago, I would have been like, I'm doing it. I got to make it happen. But starting to realize that like my health and safety are more important than making it to a dinner, my colleague totally understood. But being okay with that and being okay with being a little bit human with other people. I explained like, look, I'm coming in off of red eye. I need to do that for my job. I don't want to be falling asleep at dinner. I won't be a good dinner guest. And it was okay, but being okay with understanding that part of yourself, and the sooner you can get okay with that, the better for your personal health.
For myself, I also identify certain areas that are non-negotiables for me, certain things that I'd say like I would just not be okay compromising on. Like for me, exercise and health is one. I just always, regardless of whether I travel, whether I'm at home, I always try to do that. And second is like family, for example. So if there are certain family events, I just have to not miss them. And that has helped also figure out, sometimes when to make compromises in certain things that I need to pick, but at least that way there's always a guiding principle of, what I can't compromise on.
I like you. I feel like I've been along this road a little bit longer than these gals, and I remember being in their shoes where I had a little bit more flexibility. I'd say earlier on in my career, I probably, because I grew up in this auto industry where it was very prescribed of the way what you needed to do, I probably put myself more the work balance was on the more on heavier than the life balance. But as I got older, and of course I have children now, I think a pivotal moment for me was the day that I was working on my laptop, and my older son, when he was younger, literally slammed the laptop down. Like, Mom, look at me. Mom, pay attention. And I think at that point I realized that my work-life balance was just not quite there, right? I like the fact that, yeah, sometimes we just definitely have to say no, and we have to prioritize what we need to be at. But it is a struggle. I mean, it's not something that comes easy for me. And I am fortunate. I have a great support system at home, and that's something that I purposely put together so that I can, for example, be at these events, and I do end up traveling quite a bit in my career, so that I have support for my kids and my husband. So, yeah, I would say it's not easy, but we got to make a deliberate, conscious effort towards it. Yeah.
So part of me hates the word balance because it signals the sense of like Zen, which I think has never existed in my life. And I also just had a baby, so this is particularly interesting now. But I think of balance almost as if on a seesaw, where you're kind of constantly doing one of these things. So you're never quite there, but you're straddling and you're trying to prioritize. So there's two things I do, right? When I had a baby, I kind of went through, and on a very surface level, I went through my habits and which ones I needed to change and how am I going to change my schedule. So I was one of those people, and I still am today, where if I write something down on my to-do list and I don't do it that night, it really bothers me, right? But I can't do that now because I got to put the baby to bed. So I started to change my schedule to say, first of all, no one needs an email from you at 10 o'clock at night. Like, your team likes you, but no one needs that. So can I do it the next day? And what are things that I really need to get out tonight? And you start to find that some of these things are more about you sort of supporting the kind of person you want to be, but not having the kind of impact that maybe you want to have. So I try to change those habits. I'm not going to say I'm 100% successful at it, but I try to change, let's say, 90% of it. But the other one goes back to that North Star thing that people have said, which is, what is it that I am doing as a CEO, right? As a CEO, I believe I have three things I need to do. One is set the strategy, have the team execute the strategy, but set the strategy. 2, promote the culture. And 3, bring in national partnerships and big revenue generators. And so I really try to devote my time to those 3 things. And I ask everyone on my team who also struggles with this balance question, and they've asked me, like, how do you know what to spend time on? And I kind of turn the question back to them, and I say, do you have a set of core principles on where you should be spending your time? And yet, you're not going to hit it 100%, but if you can hit it 80, 90% of the time, you're always going to be aligning who you want to be and the things that are important with your work. And so I think having those 2 things is going to help you straddle that seesaw a little bit better, but I'll be the first to admit I definitely fall off sometimes.
As a reminder, my mother is almost 80 years old, and when I leave work, I'm required to call her as I'm driving home. And she's my sense of balance because she's going to tell me, why is it 9 o'clock that you're driving home, Denise? So I have a mean time between getting my balance in places every night. And she reminds me, your health is important, your work is important, but let me tell you, young lady, you must make sure you have balance. So that's my trick of trying to get balance. So I probably do good 75% of the time, but I do fall off quite often as well. One of the questions that came up was about mentorship and sponsorships and how do you do it? You can't do it by yourself, right? This isn't an individual game here. How do you maneuver? How do you find people who support you, who encourage you, who mentor you, who give you that great advice, not advice so that they can get ahead, but an advice so that the enterprise the potential that you have, as I mentioned so many times that there are people who saw things in me that I might not have recognized in myself. How do you stay in that realm of supporters, and how do you get those supporters?
Well, I think that an important concept to think about is having a board of directors, right? So who do you want to invite to your board? And some of those folks that are on my board are from career relationships, right? So because I've been in this industry for how long I have, I've built some relationships there. And along the way, it comes back to trust and confidence, right, or confidentiality. The other aspect is, and I always tell people that I work with, that sponsorship is real important, but don't seek sponsorship just for the act of seeking sponsorship. In my mind, yourself, whether you're a mentor or a sponsor, and that's two different things, by the way, in my mind, there's got to be some common bond or click that happens. And sometimes it doesn't work out, and that's okay. I think it's important for people, especially when entering into new relationships, to do the reach out, to have the conversations, see if there's some common characteristics there that you want to continue to pursue, but you have to continue to work at that relationship, because you want to get it to the point where there's trust, right? Mm-hmm. And that the person, or let's say the sponsor, trusts in you, so that they will advocate for you. I think that in my career, I know for a fact in my career, I'm where I am today because of sponsorship. There's aspects of career advancement. One is performance, right? We were all great performers, but there's two other aspects, your image and your exposure. How do you get those two other things? And sponsors can help bring that to the table for you. So I always tell folks, don't be afraid to ask for those meetings, and don't be afraid to ask for sponsorship. Okay.
Excellent.
I've found, especially with some of my team members that are earlier in their career, it's sort of like, I want to do anything as long as it's an advancement. And when you're looking for sponsorship and creating those relationships, part of trust is also being clear about what you want. And if you don't know, that is okay. But then have the discussion and look for insights about, how do I experiment? How do I get exposure? As opposed to, I don't know what I want to do, but I know I want to be a manager. Think a little bit more deeply about what path, because that also makes it a lot easier on your sponsor of what are the right opportunities where you can be successful. And so also taking a little bit of time to prepare yourself as a part of that conversation is very important.
One last thing too is, make sure that you're very clear with your sponsor or your mentors to be honest with you, and be ready for that honest feedback. This relationship is not about all the good stuff that happens with our careers. It's also about those challenges and honest feedback on how we're performing ourselves, so that we can continue to improve. And that again is key to that relationship as well.
Yeah, I would agree. I think so. And I've definitely seen, I think, the whole I want to reach this executive vice president to be my sponsor. So I would say the first thing that is important is never underestimate the power of peer sponsorship and peer mentorship, right? Because sometimes the people that are going to be the most honest with you and actually work with you on your insecurities, I call them insecurities, are the people that are going to be around you. And just because they're the same level with you does not, or even people who are junior than you, right? We tend to not just be like, no, I want to go up. And there's no need to do that, because if you're truly trying to work on being a better leader and being a better person, you got to look to those who understand and know you the best. And they tend to be those that work for you or work with you. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is, and I don't know how many people can do this in their roles, but I would argue the other way, right? Which is actually be very, very picky and choosy about your mentors and your sponsors, including things like, who are you going to work for next? And that's one thing I always took in my career. I never looked at the job was important and the competencies were important, but the specific manager I was working for was the most important, because that person can make or break your entire experience. Resumes look the same once you write down all the areas, I did this, I did that. We know how to do that these days. But the people that make a difference in your life are people that's going to devote time to thinking about you as a person and as a leader, and they're actually going to spend that time and give you that space in their lives and their minds. And frankly, you don't need a ton of people to do that. You need a few good people, and they're going to help you get to where you get to go. I have a friend on Wall Street who literally hangs out with billionaires all the time, and he's a hedge fund director, and he says to me, it takes 6 people, 3 people who will do absolutely anything to help you be successful, and your career will go up, and it takes 3 people who will do anything to help make you fail, and your career will go down. So all you need are 3 people.
Good advice, excellent advice. Okay, I think we're coming to the close, so maybe one more question. Tell me what drives you. What drives you?
For me, it's the desire to make a change and make the future or certain trends of the future happen. I want to, that has been the biggest driver, I think, for a while. We were talking a bit earlier about, what motivates you to get up in the morning, and continue doing things even as you're failing. And I think that vision of a future that you want to facilitate and make possible is really a core thing that drives me. But then I think a second one, especially why I love running or being part of a startup, is helping other people grow and seeing really how people who've potentially started with you, with a certain set of skills or whatever, and you've given potentially them opportunities to grow also alongside you in the company and provided mentorship and all of that, and seeing how they become also leaders. It's really something that drives me also on an everyday basis.
I think for me right now, the way the industry is changing and this concept of mobility is what's driving me. Being in this industry for so long, it's been pretty the same thing, right? Now we have this great opportunity, to your point earlier too, is to provide whether it's transportation or mobility or personal mobility to a segment of the population that we're underserved today, absolutely underserved. And that's what's driving me right now, is how do we help not only the general population, but those that are underserved? Huge opportunity.
So I had 3 goals in the last 10 years of my career. 1 is to run a business. 2 is to solve a social problem, because I came from my background was in human rights and nonprofit. And 3 is to have a team where I can actively promote people of color and women. And so running this business, which is founded on my values, because we do serve the elderly and people living with disabilities, I'm trying to hit all 3. But I would tell you the one thing that kind of takes all these things together is going to work every day and working with those whom you respect. That level of admiration, I think, short of love, is the second best emotion that humans can achieve. Just being admired by those around you that you also admire, and working with high performers, and that feeling that you get every day is what gets me out of bed.
That's excellent. That's excellent. I was telling Allison that I've worked on maybe with 3 high-performing teams, really who had gotten to that mountaintop in my career. So it doesn't come easy, and it doesn't come every day, because you're having to create that cause, create that team, put the activities together to pull it off. And then you pulled it off, and it's just really crossing that finish line. And it is the most amazing, amazing feeling ever. And then you'd never want to settle after that. I never want to go back and not be a part of a high-performing team that's driven and passionate with all the things that you've mentioned there, and has all those various elements. So once you've been at the top, you never want to go back, and you're always trying to recreate that moment. And that's something that we have to hang on to, right? It has, and quite frankly, we don't know how else to be. And I think that is a part of the mark of leaders. You don't know any other behavior but to continue to have that driven way. So I think one more question. I think I have one more question. I haven't seen the facilitator walk through. Let me ask. So how big is the ideal company as far as when it comes to this mobility activity? Is it groups of, is it going to be, because before I grew up at GM, right? And so big corporations. But as time has gone on, those corporations have redefined and restructured. GM has done it, Ford's done it, Toyota's done it, Honda's done it. Everybody's reconstructed themselves. Do we see that that's going to be the trend where every X number of years, in order to have that innovation that you need, that you can't stay huge, you have to kind of keep reconstructing or become small startups within big established companies. Is that a part of the trick that you think is coming our way?
So I can try to take that one. So maybe I'll reframe the question a little bit, because it's not so much to me about how big the company is, but can you align the right competencies from the company into the structure that it's needed, right? The same question applies to culture, because people always assume one kind of culture is better than another one, but it really it depends on the end you're trying to achieve. So for example, if you're trying to look at clock speed and move and be able to compete, then yes, you're going to need to have companies that break off certain teams that are able to do things faster, particularly with software, because the speed of software is a lot faster. But if you're touching manufacturing and product and compliance, yeah, I don't want a startup doing that, right? I want the big company that has the capital, the 100 years of safety history, and knowing how to work within regulations that are coming in and breaking laws. You want the competencies of the big company doing that. So right now, the auto industry is trying to figure out how do you take these things and position them in the right way so that you do have a flexible structure, but you're able to pit certain businesses and mobility services in the right structure, because the structure has to serve the business. So that's where I think your question, how big they need to be, it really depends on what is the problem you're trying to solve, and then design the competencies within the big companies and the startups and the teams to go after that.
Yeah, and I just need to agree with that in a sense that there's advantages of being a part of the big company, right? There's scalability, there's design, research, design. There's just some inherent capabilities that each OEM has core to their company. I think when I think about it in what we're doing, the startup idea is to help with speed, right? To your point. We don't want to get mired down in the bureaucracy of what is traditionally decision making, right? But we don't want to stray too far, especially in the beginning, because there's a lot of shared services there. There's a lot of capabilities that, as a small company, number one, if we were to build that capability, number one, we would be upside down in our business model, right? So I think we're going to see a lot of that connected small startups within the large company. And then over the years, as that business model starts to mature, there'll be some aspects that tear away from the big company because it's critical to the small company, but I still think that there's still going to be some level of connection there. Yeah.
And I think it's going to be interesting to watch, can companies pick the right structure to start?
Yeah.
And can they continue to support it?
That's right.
The patience that's taken to grow startups from this idea that really doesn't matter to the big company because that like won't even impact, it's a rounding error, to, oh my gosh, it's like a fundamental threat to my business. That happens over the course, it's not overnight, it's actually over like 5 or 6 years. And for a big company to be able to invest and have the patience to see that through is tough. And I think that's where it was interesting to me within GM, and part of the reason why I wanted to go to a startup was to be able to allow that focus and that patience and make sure that we could get the right resources and keep it and not have our targets changed every 18 months because a new executive came in and this is what the public shareholders want, this year.
But I think to Allison's point is the startup of those companies need to define the boundaries. I'm not talking about startups that are still managed by the parent, right? These are pods on their own. There's some connection, right? Maybe it's contractual, but for it to be successful, the startup has to be able to have the autonomy that it needs, for sure.
And in my experience, like we're not a part of a big organization. We're still a startup, but partnerships are a huge driver of success. And if you can recreate this concept that in everyday environment, you form partners, with various suppliers, with various companies. If you can recreate that within a big organization, I think you can really help a startup. Because I think even from our perspective, like we can't succeed in this industry without partners.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Well, I told you it was going to be amazing, and I'm telling you, I have enjoyed the insights from these young ladies so much. In fact, I think we can talk for another hour, but I know SAE has other things for you. So if you can please help me and just thank these wonderful people on the stage for their time and their insights.